Hello and welcome to Unmistakably Star Wars and this episode of Rebels Reaction. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Christine.
On this episode, we're reacting to Trials of the Darksaber. Christine, your one-word reaction.
Harsh.
Harsh. My word, confrontation.
Oh. Harsh confrontation.
Harsh confrontations. Those could potentially go together. All right, let's go.
You know of the rebellion against the Empire?
Perhaps you referred to the imminent attack on your rebel fleet.
Where is the rebel base?
I didn't know there was anyone willing to stand up against the Empire.
On this episode, we're reacting to Trials of the Darksaber. Christine, you said your one-word reaction was harsh. Why?
Well, partially with relating to Kanan's treatment of Sabine. He was pretty harsh with her. He didn't have a lot of mercy. He didn't have a lot of patience with her. But it turns out that's what she needed. But it was definitely harsh. It was aggressive and kind of hard to watch. And also, once she does express how her family treated her, that was very harsh. Not only did they not stand with her, but they actually chose the Empire over her when she was trying to help them.
Yeah.
So it's really just overall sad and powerful to see what was going on in the background the whole time.
Yeah, I think the overall tone of the episode seemed a little bit darker.
Yeah.
And relationally, I think we've had some fairly dark episodes this season.
Yeah.
But in terms of relationships, we didn't get any real villains in this episode. It was all the Ghost crew, or I guess Fen Rao is kind of thrown in there, but I guess he's a rebel now, but not really a part of the Ghost crew.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to kind of get that tone shift in their relationship, because typically the Ghost crew is pretty, like, buddy comes to mind, but it's more of,
they're all on one side.
They're friendly.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no confrontation between them.
Yeah. And on a plot tone or plot point, not a lot happened in this episode, but not a lot happened as far as like action, but a ton happened as far as relationship goes.
Yeah, and I think this is a fairly unique episode in that way.
Yeah.
We haven't really seen one of these. It's story driven, it's plot driven, it's not necessarily driven by action. It's the actual dialogue, it's the story that's really playing out, as opposed to things blowing up. And
and in a show like this, it's hard to do that well without being boring, but it wasn't boring in the slightest bit. It was fascinating and really pulled you in.
Yeah, and if anything, I really felt like the episode was too short for what they were trying to do.
Yeah. I felt like it was over really fast.
Yeah, the overall, what the end goal of the episode didn't feel like it really fit into the 20-25 minute window that the episode actually runs. Yeah. So I found that kind of interesting, and just that tonal shift, especially from Kanan, I think.
Yeah.
We've gotten some of this sort of snarky, I forget exactly how old Sabine's supposed to be, but kind of late teens, early 20s, maybe, sort of, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
Kind of attitude. But Kanan was very direct, and I think the Fen Rao as well, the concept of being short on time, I think pushed them into a situation where there really seemed to be a sense of urgency.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially from Kanan, as far as wanting to make sure that Sabine was doing things correctly.
Yeah.
I think he he and Hera had that interaction where Kanan didn't want to push her along very quickly, and yet seemed to have a sense of urgency, whereas Hera really acknowledged what Sabine was going through.
Yeah.
And really the relationship that they have, I think, is probably a unique one amongst the Ghost crew between Hera and Sabine.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I would think in part because of similar family experiences, and I think probably just connecting on a different level, whether it's that a combination of that, and I mean, they're the only females on the team,
true. Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a greater bond because of that as well.
There's kind of a big sister / like maternal role that Hera has for her.
Yeah.
She's not really old enough to be her mom, but she has more of a maternal role with her, and Sabine trusts her, I think, a lot more than she trusts everybody else. So she trusts them like on a they got her back kind of way, but they don't she doesn't really trust them emotionally. And it seems like she and Hera are more connected emotionally.
For sure. So that brings us to, I kind of mentioned how my reaction word fit in, but I think on a lot of different levels, confrontation was very much a part of the episode overall. I think the confrontation between Kanan and Sabine that kind of built throughout the episode and hit as the climax came. The confrontation that Sabine had to have within herself to finally kind of break down and at least share. I don't think it was so much admitting, but sharing what was really going on as far as her hesitancy towards this hero's call, which I think right from the beginning, I think probably about a week ago, I don't know how old the episode is, but NPR has a show called The Ted Radio Hour, and they had a whole episode on Star Wars, not so much Star Wars itself, but George Lucas's application of the hero's journey. And
I didn't get to hear that.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. You should
I'm gonna look that up.
Take a listen. But the whole idea was just how the hero's journey plays out, and I think that was very much kind of the archetype of what this episode was about. Is we kind of have a little bit of background information. We've seen the Darksaber before, and it's used in the Clone Wars, so it's when we see it again in Rebels, it's somewhat familiar to us. But then I think on top of that, Fen Rao's recounting of, and I should say this with a British accent because he does, but I won't, so I'll probably butcher it, but Tar Vizsla. That I thought that was really cool to get this flashback sort of animation history lesson.
That was a really cool way of animating that.
Yeah, kind of cave painting.
Yeah.
Almost. Or reminiscent of other things I've seen sort of in that same vein.
Yeah.
But I really liked that lore and history lesson of the origin of the Darksaber.
Yeah.
And it was fun to see how that then plays into the hesitancy of Sabine towards this call to wield the saber and then at least attempt to lead Mandalore.
And that was interesting to me that in this episode she steps up, or well, she is being pushed into being a leader, and her stepping up as a leader is the first time we're really seeing her be really take on such a leadership role. And we just talked about that last week.
Yeah, there have been moments
little ones,
where she's led a mission or sort of been in charge, but this is a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Leading her world is kind of a big step forward.
Yeah.
Or at least her clan or her family.
Yeah.
If not the whole of Mandalore. Which will be interesting to see how that ends up playing out.
Yeah.
And I think the conference. So I have the confrontation between the relational confrontation the inner confrontation and then the looming confrontation.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that we will see when she does end up wielding this saber on Mandalore, and I think there's an inevitable confrontation as a result that we'll end up seeing. There's a little bit in the mid-season trailer that we see her at least using, and then kind of the end of even this episode as they're sort of showing the preview things that sort of shows up, but we don't have a real picture of what that confrontation is going to look like, whether it's an actual physical confrontation and she has to use the skills she picked up from this episode and what Kanan is trying to teach her, or more of a leadership confrontation and more of a convincing that has to go on, as opposed to having to fight for her position as leader.
Yeah. I would anticipate some of both.
Probably.
I'm really interested to see how it comes to be. Because in my understanding, we don't know of Mandalore being super involved or being, like, the world being part of the rebellion.
Yeah.
So if she's successful, then it's going to be cool to see how that happens. Or she could be unsuccessful, and that could be huge and horrible.
Yeah. And, well, we earlier this season when Fen Rao shows up, we get a little bit of insight into what's going on with Mandalore and some of the Mandalorians. But yeah, I think as far as the overall story development of the rebellion, since we haven't really, in the things that we've seen thus far, there haven't been a whole lot of Mandalorians flying around.
Yeah.
It will be pretty interesting and kind of intriguing to see. Yeah. So let's kind of take a look at the episode overall with the big three.
Yeah.
Number one, and we've kind of talked about it already, is Sabine's call.
Yeah.
So Fen Rao kind of really pushes her into it. Then Kanan does, and then
Even
Hera does, and it's really kind of this push from all. It's a full court press on Sabine to really get her to at least consider.
Yeah.
But I think there's enough peer pressure there and sort of an internal, I should do this.
Yeah, but she clearly doesn't want to. Yeah. Also, she doesn't really go for it until Hera gets involved. So I think Hera's push is pretty significant to her. And it just, Hera doesn't push people into doing stuff on a whim. She only cares about stuff that seems to matter.
Yeah, and it makes a pretty big difference as far as kind of like we talked about that relationship that's already established, that the leadership role that Hera has and how that impacts her ability to do that. And Sabine really kind of takes the entire episode to get past this hesitancy towards that call.
Yeah.
That hero's journey, her reluctance towards that, which I found pretty fun. As we get to the end of the episode, and I think it's that story arc of hers, whether it's next episode or future, that it'll be fun to see how that journey sort of plays out.
Yeah.
Number two is it's training that goes on with Kanan and Ezra and Fen to an extent.
A little bit.
But the dynamic of that interaction overall with all four of those individuals, I guess we could even throw Hera in a little bit as well.
She doesn't insert herself,
that it was very much a departure from the relationships that we've kind of talked about, but it was really interesting for me to see Sabine's ability to apply the skills that she already has and how inept she actually seemed when it came down to it.
Yeah, I mean, she's a really good fighter. When it comes to using a saber, she didn't seem to know what she was doing.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was played up for the fact that Kanan and Ezra are Jedi, so
there's a
trying
big difference
to
there.
draw a distinction there,
Yeah.
and a pretty wide one, or if it was Sabine, as we kind of see towards the end of the episode, with her kind of giving in,
Yeah.
or resolving the conflict from within, which Kanan talks about.
Yeah.
That she's able to better apply the skills that she already has.
She was fighting really, really strongly against Kanan, even like pushes him down the hill. I don't know if at that point he was letting her kind of just explode into this role, or if he actually was in a little bit beaten, but she was doing enough that he wasn't at ease.
Yeah, and I found that to be kind of an interesting dynamic that was created as a result of that training and kind of the progression over the episode overall. I also found it kind of interesting that the training, although it seemed like if you were just to kind of watch and you didn't get, they inserted the call from Hera, that it would have just been in an afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
But it was multiple
Several days.
days.
Yeah, that's true. It
So
didn't seem like it was that long.
Yeah, the time perspective seemed very off.
Yeah.
As far as just kind of that progression of time.
Yeah.
It didn't seem, from a kind of storytelling perspective, they just inserted the fact that it was multiple days instead of showed it.
Yeah.
Which some of it plays into the running time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably most of it, but that the majority of the episodes that we've seen in Rebels, and maybe Clone Wars for that matter, there haven't been a whole lot that are multiple days.
That's true, yeah. Most of them take place in a pretty short period of time.
So that was kind of something, I think, again, unique to this episode.
It's a very unusual episode. Good and powerful, but unusual.
Yeah. And then we come to number 3 with kind of the realization that Sabine comes to with her ability to wield the Darksaber.
Yeah.
Her learning to wield it, and then her admitting, kind of at least beginning to resolve that inner conflict or confrontation she has within herself. And I felt like it was a very rousing end to the episode. It built really well.
Ended on a high for sure.
And kind of a positive step towards whatever's next.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see that as she gains confidence in her ability to lead, how that plays into her interactions.
Yeah.
Along with really getting a good chunk, at least in a description of her background and what really happened to her. Because I don't think we've really seen a whole lot or heard a whole lot about where or how she ended up with the Rebels, and then we've only heard little breadcrumbs of conflict with her parents and her family.
Yeah, that's true. Up until this episode, we didn't know what happened with her and her family. We knew that she was obviously not with them anymore, and there was an issue between them, a betrayal, but we didn't know whose betrayal. We assume it's Sabine's, according to them, but we didn't know any detail. And all we knew before was that she had been in the Imperial Academy and then left it.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to see how much story they packed into a couple minutes of her explaining what happened, and then also to realize there's so much more to her story than what we even could conceive before.
Yeah, this episode packs in so much of so much story into very brief.
Yeah.
And they don't really show it, which was interesting as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of telling.
So I think that kind of brings us to the bottom line of the episode. For me, it was just a ton of information, not a whole lot of showing, a lot of telling, but I think it didn't feel like a slow episode, which sometimes when that happens, when we get a lot of telling, which is kind of, I think, some people's complaints with the prequels is that there was a lot of telling going on, particularly in Phantom Menace. And I mean, when you're playing with above an hour runtime of something, that telling can kind of get old. But when we're looking at something in maybe a 20-minute window, you kind of, if you want to tell, it doesn't feel like we're getting bogged down in details.
Yeah.
Because they did a really good job of driving the story with the telling, both with sort of the flashback that Fen Rao has, and then Sabine and kind of her background.
Yeah, definitely.
So I felt that it was an overall really strong episode, a very different sort of episode than we've seen. And even though there's not a whole lot of action, I think it'll end up being one of the better foundational episodes of this season.
Absolutely.
At a minimum, the second half of the season, but the season overall, and potentially the series, because this feels like very much a turning point in how at least the character of Sabine is going to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I really liked this episode. It was unusual. It was not action oriented. It wasn't really mission oriented. But there was a sort of a mission just to get Sabine ready. But
yeah,
I felt like it was really strong. It wasn't until afterward that I really thought about the fact that it was not a lot happened, because it didn't feel, like you said, it didn't feel slow. It didn't feel boring. A lot was going on, and there was a lot of exposition and a lot of just explaining, but it didn't feel like it was just them talking to us. It still felt like part of the story. And in the telling, it was not only explaining what happened in the past, but also changing the relationships between the characters that we see.
Yeah.
So there was more to it than just one person telling the story.
Yeah.
So I really liked it.
Yeah. I think yet another strong episode from season 3.
Yeah, strong season.
And it's just continuing to build. I mean, we got Zeb finally.
Yes.
Last episode. We get more of Sabine this episode, and I think this arc, or her story, is going to continue to develop.
Yeah, which is going to be super cool.
And really kind of expand her role significantly.
Yeah. Hopefully
She doesn't go to Mandalore and just get shut down.
Yeah, seriously.
But I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen.
Based on how the show tends to go, I would not assume that is going to happen.
No, probably not. That wraps up this episode of Rebels Reaction. Be sure to check us out online at unmistakably.starwars.com, our various podcasts throughout the week. I don't know if we're putting out enough content for people. We might have to add at least 1 or 2 more shows to make it 5 days a week.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe someday. We'll see.
Maybe.
Probably not. We're all busy enough as it is.
Yeah.
But it's fun. So we're on Twitter at unmistakably SW, Facebook.com/unmistakably Star Wars. And until next time, this has been Rebels Reaction. I'm Tyler.
I'm Christine.
May the Force be with you.